So we've now looked at 5 voting methods. Let's talk about fairness with voting methods. Well, first off, when there are only 2 candidates in an election, the clear winner and what would be fair is if the candidate who gets a majority of the votes wins. And that's generally how all elections with 2 candidates work. The one that gets the most or the majority, because there's only 2 candidates, would actually win the election. When we have 3 or more candidates in an election, however, things become more difficult, and as we've seen, different voting methods may result in different outcomes. So how would we consider what's fair in these situations? Well, mathematicians and sociologists, people who look at voting methods, have actually developed what they call fairness criterion for voting methods. And I want to go over those 4 criterion and look at examples of how they apply. The first voting fairness criterion is the majority criterion. And by the way, one thing I should mention here is that when we talk about criterion in the plural, we say criteria. When we talk about criterion singular, it would be criterion. So the majority criterion states that if a candidate receives a majority of first choice votes, then they should be the winner of the election. Okay? So if you think about this if-then statement, because we had talked about when an if-then statement is true and when it's false, when it fails, this majority criterion would only be violated in the case that the if part is true and the then part is false. So in other words, the majority criterion is going to be violated if a candidate receives a majority of the votes, but they lose the election. Okay, so the majority criterion basically says that if you receive a majority, you should automatically be the winner. So this criterion is going to be violated, again, if someone receives a majority of the votes, but they lose the election. It turns out the majority criterion is indifferent if no one receives a majority. You would not be you would not fail the criterion if or violate it if no one receives a majority of the votes in the election. All right, so let's move on to the second one, the Condorcet criterion. This says that if a candidate wins every pairwise battle against all of their opponents, then they should be the winner of the election. In other words, if a particular candidate, if they go head-to-head against every other candidate, if they could win, if they were in an individual race against each of their opponents, then they should win the election. And that makes sense. If you would individually beat each one of your opponents, you should be the winner of the election. The Condorcet criterion would be violated if a candidate could win every pairwise battle, but they actually end up losing the election. So they win every pairwise battle, but they lose the election. That really doesn't seem fair. And so that's why we have the Condorcet criterion as a fairness criteria for voting methods. The third and the fourth are a little bit trickier to understand. The independence of irrelevant alternatives, and boy, that's a mouthful, so a lot of times people say the double IA criterion. This is a situation or a rule that says a candidate should continue to win an election even in the case that a losing candidate drops out after the votes are collected and the losing candidates are redistributed to the remaining candidates. So what this is saying is that if a candidate who is losing drops out, it shouldn't affect who the winner is if those votes get redistributed. Okay. The fourth fairness criterion is what we call the monotonicity criterion. And this one says that a candidate should continue to win an election even in the scenario that some voters change their rank preferences to score the winning candidate higher in their rankings. So the person who won with the original rankings should still win if there's a slight change where some of the voters rank that person who won higher. And you would expect that if some of the voters rank the winner higher, that winner should still be the winner, right? These people have just changed their votes to basically be on the winning team. So you would expect the same winner to still be the winner. These last two are a little bit trickier because they kind of have to do with if a particular thing happens, like a loser drops out, or if voters change their rankings. So they're kind of very specific situations. Um, and so a little bit trickier to kind of understand, but we're going to look at examples of elections for each of these criterion and evaluating how they each work in the next few slides.